Hello there. In this tasting I'd like to look at a sweet wine from the Sauternes region. So I have here the 2004 vintage of Chateau Rieussec. And Chateau Rieussec is a Premier Grand Cru Classe from the 1855 classification. And sometimes it's forgotten that at the same time as the classification of the Médoc, with also Haut-Brion in the Grave, takes place in 1855, there are also first and second growth wines created in Sauternes, and in fact there were 11 first growths, and also sitting above them as a Premier Grand Cru Classe Exceptionnel, Chateau Rieussec, within the area of Sauternes and Barsac. So yes, Chateau Rieussec, Premier Grand Cru Classe from the village of Fargues, which is one of the communes that comprises the Sauternes appellation. Now the property was established by the Carmelite monks, but was seized during the French Revolution. And it had a large number of owners, and through the period where it's recognised as a first growth in 1855. The most recent change of ownership came 30 years ago in 1984, when the property was acquired by the Domaines de Barons de Rothschild, so that's the group that owns Château Lafite, in conjunction with somebody called Albert Frére. And Albert is involved in Louis Vuitton Moet Hennessy and also owns a share in Château Cheval Blanc in Saint-Emilion. Now the new owners were quick to appoint somebody called Charles Chevalier as the new director of Chateau Rieussec, and change happened really quite quickly. You had a rearrangement of the vineyards, and additional vineyard was bought, and you had new cellars built as well, and all this came about in time for Rieussec to make the most of that wonderful run of vintages through the end of the 80s and into 1990, of 88, 89, 90, where Rieussec made some fabulous wines and really regained its reputation, I suppose, as one of the leading estates of the Sauternes region. Now the vineyard now comprises, I believe, somewhere in the region of 93 hectares of vines, so this is quite a large property. And they sit at one of the higher points in Sauternes. I mean, it's a low hill. At its highest, it's something like 75 metres above sea level. But in terms of avoiding frosts and damaging mists and fogs, being on a hill is quite important. So actually the estate sits pretty much between Château Rieussec and Château de Fargues, and the western side of the commune of Fargues. The soils here, a combination of sandy gravels making up about 80% of the vineyard, and clay, which comprises the remaining 20%. Plantings are predominantly Semillon. There's about 80% of Semillon, with 17% of Sauvignon Blanc, and then a final 3% of Muscadel. 2004 was a vintage remembered for some severe storms. There were 3 quite heavy hailstorms, particularly one in June, that was quite damaging for some producers. Average rainfall was about normal, and there were some quite cool periods towards the end of the season. Certainly June and September were relatively cool, but there was enough heat at the end of the season to dry the vineyards out and enable picking. Picking goes on, of course, entirely by hand, because the pickers are going through and they're selecting out those berries that are affected by the botrytis fungus. And this is a fungus that has caused the skins of the grapes to become porous and has allowed water out of the berry, concentrating sugar and acidity inside it and giving those special honeyed flavours that the botrytis fungus can give to a wine. The blend of this wine is 89% of Semillon, with something like 9.5% of Sauvignon Blanc and I think 1.5% of Muscadel going into the blend. So predominantly Semillon. The fruit is destemmed, it's crushed, and it ferments in French oak barrels, a high proportion of which are likely to be new. Following fermentation, the wine then aged for 26 months in oak prior to release. And that's given us its wonderful colour, and hopefully will give us some beautifully integrated oak aromas. So let's have a look at the wine. We've got a deep, almost slightly sort of bronzed, golden colour there, heading sort of towards tawny. The wine has 13.5% alcohol according to its label, but it's not, despite its sweetness, which I would assume is somewhere between about 120 and 140 grams per litre of sugar, it's not particularly forming tears on the glass. I mean, it is, but it's quite reticent to do so. So let's see what we make of the aroma, shall we? It's a combination of a couple of things. There's a combination of a rich honeyed note, and then there's more of a sort of a developed oak aroma. But the entire oak note is incredibly well integrated. It's almost like the sort of the polish on a grand table or something like that. There's a very smooth note to the whole thing. I suppose slightly nutty. There are touches of apricot-y fruit coming out from behind the honey, and there are hints of almonds as well. So let's have a taste, shall we? On the palate, of course, that's very sweet. You know, tasting sweetness on the tip of my tongue, where the majority of your sweetness taste receptors will be. But there's a texture to the wine as well. It's medium to full-bodied, and you have these lovely notes of, I would say, dried apricot. There's a concentration to them. They're to the fore, really, and then behind that there's a honeyed roundness and a richness. But there's also a texture. I would say sort of a marzipan note. There are some beautiful, smooth, sort of phenolic notes in here. And yes, the marzipan note is enhanced, I suppose, by the sort of slight vanilla notes, touches of almond. There's a real complexity here. And then you come back to a richness. Now, in terms of the wine's acidity, that's actually really quite nicely balanced. Yes, the wine is finishing with just a hint of sweetness. Those honeyed notes are returning on the relatively long finish. But there's also a freshness, and with that freshness you're seeing notes of floral notes, actually honeysuckle notes. I suppose I'm able to see those because actually at 13.5% the alcohol is really quite nicely imbalanced. It's certainly being balanced by the fruit, and these more delicate floral aromas can come out at the end there. And coming back to the freshness, I can feel I'm salivating at the end of this. So yes, the wine finishes with flavours of honey and those lovely sort of botrytis notes, honeysuckle flavours and aromas that are coming out there. The Wine Searcher average score for this wine was just 91. And I suppose when you're thinking about that, you have to bear in mind this is not a cheap wine. I'll leave a link in the notes below so you can find out pricing and availability near where you are. And the wine clearly has an ability to age. This is in no hurry to drink up. The freshness, the richness of the palate, I should imagine that's a wine that is unlikely to decline much in the next 10 years. I think it probably is at about optimal drinking at the moment. You know, the roundness and the richness and the smoothness sort of suggest to me this is a fully mature wine, and you might start to lose some of those more delicate elements that are making this so delightful. There may be an argument to say maybe this is worth a score of 92 or something like that, but I think this is in about the right place. It's certainly not the most complex or richest example of Rieussec you'll ever come across, but at the same time it has lovely balance and is a very enjoyable wine. So thank you very much for joining us. I do hope you've found the tasting of interest. If you've enjoyed it, do please press the like button. Do please also consider signing up and subscribing to our YouTube channel. It would be fantastic to have your support. If you have friends you think might like to watch the video, please feel free to forward it to them. If you have any comments, do please add those in the comments box below. We'd be very interested to hear what you think about the wines, the tastings we're doing, or anything else that relates to that. But most importantly, do please try and take some time and come and join us for another tasting in the very near future, won't you? Thanks again. Bye for now.